All right, welcome to FACT's webinar called Winter Housing for Poultry, Tips for Overwintering Your Birds. It'll be presented by Alex Needham and Nick Batchelder, and it's hosted by Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT. I am Larissa McKenna, FACT's Humane Farming Program Director, and I also direct our Fund a Farmer project. So I will be moderating the webinar this evening. Thank you all so much for joining us. So just a quick introduction before we get started. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, is a national nonprofit organization. We're headquartered in Chicago, and we promote the safe and humane production of meat, milk, and eggs. I direct the Fund a Farmer project, which awards grants and facilitates peer-to-peer farmer education to increase the number of animals that are raised humanely. And this webinar is part of our Humane Farming webinar series. So at this time, I'm delighted to introduce two of our two presenters this evening, both of whom are also past Fund a Farmer grant recipients. I should also say that I've had the honor and pleasure of visiting both of their farms. Our first speaker will be Alex Needham of Radical Root Farm in Libertyville, Illinois. In 2014, Alex and his wife, Allison, received a Fund a Farmer grant to construct a mobile chicken system for their laying hens. Tonight, Alex will be sharing information on his experience overwintering their birds, including how they manage feed, water, shelter in the cold months. Our second speaker is Nick Batchelder of Midnight Sun Farm in Harvard, Illinois. In 2013, Nick and his partner Becky received a grant from FACT for quite a similar project to build mobile chicken shelters for their flock of laying hens. Tonight, Nick will present on how he cares for his hens and manages egg production during the winter. So we're very lucky to have both of them here with us today to talk about, to share their knowledge and their expertise. And they will be available to answer your questions later on in the webinar. But now, without further ado, Alex, please take it away.
Hi, I'm Alex Needham, Radical Root Farm. We're going to walk you through kind of what we do with our chickens for the winter. And kind of how we manage kind of all the major areas. We also will briefly go over kind of brooding chickens, which we do over the winter to bring on a new flock. Let's see. So we are a 13-acre certified organic farm in Libertyville, Illinois. We have three major outlets, which is farmers market in the city of Chicago, and then a farm stand on site as well. That's open 3 days a week, as well as our CSA. I think we're at about 150 members right now. And then we also have laying hens as well that kind of work within our pasture rotation. We currently at 600 chickens that we do are all layers. And then going into the winter, it's not on there, but we do about 300 layers that we go through the winter on. We're at about 200 to 300 dozen eggs a week at peak production, and then now we're at about 80 to 100 depending on our needs. We do sell off part of our flock in anticipation for the winter, and we're not doing markets anymore and that sort of thing. I kind of whenever I look at our chickens, I always look at it in three major areas: feed, water, and shelter. So anytime I'm going into a coop or work with the chickens, I always look at those three things. And then I added electric, which is kind of a miscellaneous category that I really only look at for overwinter. So it's everything from lighting, heaters if they're running, brooder lamps, anything that is really just for winter housing. Okay, so I'll dive into feed. We are usually on a 16% layer ration in the peak of the season. We just switched over to a certified organic feed, which has a little higher protein. That's at 17%. So I do know that people over the winter have raised the protein levels just to help the chickens out through the stressful period. We add a few more additional items to kind of keep them healthy. They're out on pasture throughout the year, so they're getting rocks and all the things they need to kind of to be healthy. But once they get moved into the the hoop house, which I'll get into with shelter. We try to add a few things. So one of the things we added oyster shells. They're really stressed out when they're in this setting. So we just feel like the calcium of oyster shells kind of helps out a little bit and keeps egg production regular. And I'm sure they're getting rocks in the hoop house, but we like to add a little bit of grit just to be on the safe side. We used to not add those things, and we did see a minor decrease in production when we didn't have that from years in the last 2 years that we've added it. They also have outdoor access, which helps a lot, and I'll get into that in a little bit. For water, we have, I think they're 275-gallon totes. They're a byproduct of most companies in like the shipping industry, so oils will go in that and a few other things. We fill it every week. They go through almost all of it. And we also, another addition that we add is a gallon of vinegar at least every month. If the excrement, the poop, is looking a little bit on the runnier side or a like lighter brown, we like to add it a little more often because they're not being rotated. I don't know if they're picking things up or getting having more tax on their system, but it just helps kind of keep them healthy. So we add that at least once a month, sometimes twice a month, and then that's just kind of poured right into the tank. There's no agitation or anything like that. In terms of winter, we use this setup year round, but in terms of winter, we've found to keep that from freezing. There's a bucket heater. We like the one on the bottom left, which is a K&H, I believe, brand. If you go off their website, we sized it at 1,500 watts, and that's what we started with. I'm now down to like 750, and I'm pretty sure we could go less just to kind of save money on electric and have to use less pull. So I'm with the 750 watt model right now, and I will probably next year get two 250 watt models. But we get down to, on a bad year, negative 20 degrees for not a prolonged period of time, but a day or two. This year we were only at negative 2 or 4 degrees, and I haven't had those things freeze up on me yet with that bucket heater. So we've been pretty happy with it. Water continued. We have tried a lot of things over years. I'm kind of been using this setup for 2 years now. I'm really big on automation, so the least amount I have to do, the better. We use bell waters year round, and then one of the ways we keep the lines from freezing is just heat tape. It's, I think, a plumbing product or like something you put around your pipes to keep them from freezing in your basement. The water is coming out about 10 feet away from this, maybe a little less. It can be a shorter run. I also don't like using 2 bell waters because it's just more line to freeze. But with the heat tape and that bucket heater, we're able to kind of keep the water in the lines from freezing, and that I haven't had any issues this year at all with it. Sometimes, for those of you that know bell waters, the plunger mechanism is what I think it is, but the spring mechanism that it comes out at freezes, and then sometimes the Y splitter or any fitting kind of freezes before the others. And I don't know if I have a picture of it here, but I think it's next actually. Yeah, we on the right, we use a blow dryer, and we used to not be as automated and you just lug water in, but I'd much rather spend 10 minutes warming my hands with a hair dryer than lugging water for 10 minutes. So it's not that big of a deal. Usually within 5 or 10 minutes with the blow dryer right on either the splitter valve or any of the fittings that are frozen, then it clears right up. I was out there for maybe 10 minutes this morning, and then yesterday morning didn't have to do anything, and I think we were hitting like 7 degrees last night. And then kind of just a basic thing on the left, we are getting our water year-round from frost-free hydrants. We're lucky enough to have a pretty nice well here, and so we're able to use it year-round. with the frost-free hydrants. That water is probably about 100 or 200 feet away from the actual hoop houses that we keep the chickens in. So we just run hose once a week, fill it up in about 45 minutes while we're filling up feed. And then actually really important is to blow out your lines with air gun, just so that there's no water in the lines freezing. So that next time you go to do it and there's frozen water there. I think that's it for water. We used to use this, they're just kind of, I think you can get them without it being built in, but these are heated waters. I think they're 3 gallons. I liked it. The only problem is you're lugging water. You're dealing with electric right on water, so there's plenty of opportunity of getting it wet and getting shocked and it not working. It works a lot better for kind of smaller flocks. We were having to refill those 2 to 3 times a day, and that's kind of a lot of water to haul and keep from freezing. And also a lot of energy to kind of keep it going. If you do go with this, you'll notice a funnel in the upper left-hand side, which we use to fill them without, so that it wouldn't splatter onto the base, and then just kind of once that gets wet, you have a wet electric, which is never good. And then there's a kind of a stock pot that one of them is being held in to kind of hold it upright as you're kind of putting it in the water. I definitely would highly recommend this for smaller flocks, but it's kind of not really efficient when you're dealing with over 100 or 200 chickens. There is, like I said, a base that you can buy, which will actually just heat up. And then I've also heard of people using like a concrete block with like a light bulb. That scares me though for some reason. Shelter, we have 6 12 by 100 hoop houses. The ample space. It's about 1,200 square feet. So we are at about, like I said, 200 to 300 birds. What about 4 to 6 square feet per bird, which is really maybe not on the higher end, but for an enclosed space, coop pretty high. We have outdoor access, which really helps, just from an airflow perspective, from just a health, chicken perspective, happiness, being outside. But there is quite a bit of problem with aerial predation over the winter, even more so than the summer and spring months. We kind of are able to manage this. We actually, you can kind of see in that picture, we string a lot of baling twine, kind of like a maze overhead in the areas where they're usually doing. Most hawks like to swoop in, so if they don't have like a clear line of sight, it usually discourages them from doing it. That being said, I probably lost maybe 5 this whole winter, and they're out every day. So there is some loss, but I wouldn't say that's any more than the summer months. Nest boxes are pretty standard. We use 10-hole from Cont, really good product, KUHL. Pretty much everything that you've seen, from waterers to nest boxes to the feeders that are in there are that brand. Highly suggest going through them directly. Tends to be cheaper, and they also know what they're talking about too when you're talking to them. The nest boxes are on the higher end, so we have 10. We have, what is that? 10, about 80. So that's on the higher end. Typically, you'll have 1 to 4 or 1 to 8 birds, but it kind of doubled as a roost. It can fit about 200 to 300 just on those alone in terms of space. So we leave it in there as that. There's another roost in there as well to the far back, which I don't think I have any pictures of. We also use straw bedding, just from the local feed store. The initial bedding is going to be probably about like 6 bales in the whole area. I like it pretty thick, 6 to 10. And then we'll do 2 bales a week for the nest boxes and the ground. Seems to be pretty ample. It keeps them happy too. So if there is like a 0 degree day that you're not letting them out, or trying to restrict their access outside, it's not that big of a deal because they have a really nice soft bedding. They also love playing in straw. It's just one of their most favorite days. Fencing. So this is kind of like our current setup. We actually have had zero inside like predators. So no coyotes, raccoons, I guess skunks and all that, the random ones. But we haven't had any losses inside the fences here. Sometimes, occasionally, like a chicken will get out, whether it's the door closed or the door flying open at night. But they won't actually go inside the fence. What it is you have the outside fence, which is kind of it's 4 strands. I just kind of hide it, so the low thing and then one to jump, although a coyote can easily jump over that. It's deer fencing, so I think they call it a 2D deer fencing system from Premier One, which is a great fencing company. It's on a solar charger. I want to say it's their 150 PSR 150. I'm a really big fan of something that people can just take and go, because if I'm not doing it, I don't, want them messing it up. So it's really the whole fence charger is right there in that one solar panel box at the bottom. Important to note that both of these fences are on different chargers. So if one goes out, we're not in a bad place. And then the outside one hits incredibly hard, like off the charts hard, like the kind of hit where you aren't sure if your heart stopped or if it beat harder. So that is the biggest deterrent. So I haven't actually seen any coyote prints on the inside of that or the inner fence. The inner fence is mostly to contain the chickens so that they're not kind of everywhere in every hoop house that we have food in. We're growing food in the other hoop houses currently, so it kind of keeps them contained in a specific area. So it's 2 fences, and that has worked incredibly well. So I would recommend at least doing the outside one if you're not going to go to netting. Netting is, anyone that's dealt with it is kind of, it's not exactly the greatest thing. This year we snipped the bottom 2 strands on it, to kind of keep it from shorting out. So far I've been happy with that, but it does involve destroying your fence or the main part of it. So I'll let you know how that goes. That's a later date. Electric is kind of one of the last things that we look at. We do have our chickens on supplemental light, so we do not allow them to cease laying. The laying does drop down, so I guess in a typical summer you're at 80, 85%, and then it could go as low as 50, even below that percent laying. So the supplemental lighting just kind of slowly keeps them going, but they're not exactly laying like as if it were summer. So that needs to be taken into account. We did a lot of electrical work ourselves. We run, we ran 240 out there so there's just a portable quad down there, and we're just running it all off on there. We suck up a lot of juice, so it really was really important to us to get a high amount of energy or electricity out there. It still isn't enough, so that's something you need to take into account depending on what you're actually running. So you need to know your amps and what kind of voltage you're going to need on there. On the right-hand side is just a timer that the lights are run on. And I think I might have a better view of the lights on another slide. They're just fluorescent overhead lights, nothing fancy, but it's enough. I'm sure if we put a little more work into it, we might be able to find some wavelength things to kind of keep them going a little more, but it's just keeping them going. We start that in our actual mobile house around us. We typically like to have them on supplemental light late August, and then they'll come off it probably in about 2 to 3 months now, probably closer to 2. And that timer just keeps it so that there's 16 hours of daylight. Should push it a little bit towards 17, just to be sure. I think that's it for electric. In terms of brooding, we replace our flock each year. So we're brooding either at the end of winter or the beginning of winter. a new flock. Then we take our old flock and we usually are able to sell it off to people who are processing for stew hens or who are okay with 2-year-olds. We used to keep them for 2 years. I felt like the second year is never it's worth it, but it's not as good as the first year. So this year we brought a new flock on in October, which was new for us. It's incredibly early. I kind of felt like we needed to have them laying before markets start up rather than what I feel like typically happens, which is, you get them in January and February and then you're waiting still in May for them to start laying. We'll keep this flock of 200 to 300 until probably about March or April. And then the new flock that started in late October will be laying, I have it on my calendar here, it should be the end of the month. It was important for us to have them at 6 to 8 weeks before the really cold, bitter winter in December hit, so that they would be adequately feathered out, just in case things went down. I'm going to briefly go over this and try not to spend a lot of time on brooding specifically, but more on heat issues and water issues. We have, there's another one, 3 brooder boxes that I can't remember what they call them, hovers or something like that. And then we use supplemental heat. Those are also cold brand 4 lights brooder hangers. So we use all of those. So we're sucking a lot of energy. I'm pretty sure it's 2 amps per light bulb, and you're looking at least 16 lights there. So it's quite a bit of energy, and that's kind of what we use for supplemental light. We do use a different feed, obviously, for brooding, and then for bedding, we do a different bedding of wood chips. But the setup's the same. I mean, you can see the hose run right there at the bottom right, go into the bell waterers, and then the heat tape going around it to kind of keep the water flowing. The biggest challenge for us now that we've taken care of the predators is going to be just keeping water flowing. Feed, obviously, there's no major issues other than adding the grit and the oyster shells. Quickly talk about finished products. We are doing eggs, so it's kind of challenging to kind of find a good space to wash them. We have staff that works for us year-round, so it's important. Using our house used to be an option. As the kids get older, I don't want anyone around my living quarters. So we went ahead and built this. It's just a small enclosed movable structure. I think in another picture before you saw a heater. You can throw a heater in there. Again, we're blowing out all those water lines, but we're able to wash in there. We've got up near the top, you've got supplemental light, electric, has a water hookup on the outside and drainage as well. So you're blowing out all your lines. But you're able to create, a 6 by or 4 by 8 space that's warm. In terms of egg production, again, we're at about 80 to 100 dozen eggs a week that we're selling on site. It's really important kind of as you're thinking about doing this to think through like why you're doing it. I mean, I love keeping chickens, but I don't know that it's got to pay for itself. So in terms of thinking about a farm business, do you have an outlet for that many eggs? How are you going to wash them? How are you going to move that eggs in the winter? For us, for some reason, the amount of people that want eggs in the winter actually drops. I was watching something the other day that said they were saying that it actually increases over the winter. So for us, that's not a problem. So we actually are selling off our flock to meet that need now, rather than what we used to do, which is sell them wholesale. And I've been really happy about that. A little less work. Anyway, that is, I think, my last slide. We use, on the right, we since we are growing food, we're able to give them a lot of vegetables throughout the year when they're not being moved. So that's kind of a nice thing. Anyway, that's all I got. I guess I'm going to take questions at the end of this.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. That's wonderful. I know we had a couple questions that came in during your presentation. I'm going to save those until the Q&A just so we can kind of keep those all together. So those of you that have asked questions, don't worry, we will get to them. But at this point, I'm going to turn the mic over to Nick, who is going to provide our second presentation of the evening. Here we go.
All right. You hear me okay? I hope. Um, yeah, right, chicken sweaters. Um, so yeah, we're over here in Harvard, Illinois. We actually used to be neighbors with Alex, so I'm pretty familiar with what he's got going on too. It's good to see. We've been doing chickens for like 7 years, 4 years. We've been doing it profitably. Um, so we'll talk about winter and what we do here in Harvard, how it's a little different, how there's a lot of similarities too. It's good, interesting to see. Um, so yeah, some of these highlights of what you can look for your winter versus your summer. You can see there's going to be a lot of changes from winter to summer in production. We intentionally drive our production down quite a bit in the winter because it's harder to sell eggs in the winter is what we've found. And keeping a lot of inventory around is also difficult because there's just fewer markets. And for instance, we live a good distance away from our customer base, so we're driving it a long ways. So it helps us to, drive that production down. I'll tell you, we do that mostly through lighting, and we do that with controlling the feed and the water situation, which I'll talk about how all that goes. Let's see, storing your eggs, also an issue in the winter because they freeze at 27 degrees. An egg will freeze at about 27 degrees, so it's better than water, but you don't want to leave them outside. You want to make sure and collect them. We go and collect all of our eggs by about noon because otherwise they could freeze in the nest box. So changes in production relates to molting. Molting is something you'll see a lot when you're looking up how to operate your chickens and how to keep that all going. And molting is kind of a funny general term that gets thrown around a lot. And a lot of people think it just means, feathers falling off, which it does pertain to. But when you're talking about an egg production operation, it really more means egg production is going to be dropping off. And so we actually encourage a molt after the market season is over in October, November. That's when we go from being able to sell, as many eggs as we can put in a truck to less. We'll sell, maybe 80 to 100 dozen a week if we're lucky in the winter, and it sometimes drops off even more during the holiday season. So we encourage a molt, and the way we do that is by restricting light, by restricting feed, and by restricting water. A lot of people have some issues with that, but it actually works out pretty good because you don't have to do it for very long, and the production will go down. So it's nice. Let's see, next slide. Scheduling your flock, that's something that's important to do in the winter. So our schedule is we have also, like Alex, we have about 600 birds that we keep going. Our flock is divided into 300 bird flocks that are about a year apart because a good laying flock really won't lay for longer than 2 years. You can stretch it a little longer than 2 years, but I've never been able to do it profitably. So I shut them down after 2 years. They retire into the freezer after 2 years. So you'll get about 18 months of good laying out of a flock. So what we do is we order up our baby chicks we have them arrive on the farm by November, and sometime in November, whenever works good for the situation we're in that year. So then if they're babies in November, they'll be laying good by May. Give it 20 weeks before you start seeing your first eggs. 24 weeks, you'll start really seeing steady egg production if you did it right. So that's what we do is we order 300 birds every November or so, 300 to 350. And then we retire the flock after they're 2 years old. That way we always have 300 birds in the winter and 600 birds in the summer. We can sell more eggs in the summer. We want more birds laying in the summer. There you go. That's our secret. Heritage versus hybrid breeds. That's something that comes up a lot. A lot of people really like their heritage breeds. I don't. If you have a niche market that really wants you to be, continuing that heritage breed thing, like Pretty Birds, Barred Rocks, and Rhode Island Reds, and all the Aracanas. They're lovely. And I always keep 10 or 15 around because they add variety and they're nice. Maybe a rooster or two. I don't go for roosters. But the hybrid layers are the ones that lay eggs, and the eggs are what's profitable. And that's the thing you really need to focus on, I think, if you're going to be running a farm operation of any kind. You need to think about what's going to make you the most dollars. And unless you have a niche market that's going to pay you extra for raising those heritage breeds aren't going to make you more eggs, thus they won't make you more dollars. So think about that when you're putting your flock together. If you have a small hobby flock, go heritage breeds. It's great. The other good thing about heritage breeds is that they will slow down a lot or potentially shut down entirely in the winter. So if you have no winter market or you don't feel like delivering eggs in the winter, maybe heritage breeds is the way to go. Having not done a whole lot of heritage breeds, though, I can't really comment too extensively on that. We sell our eggs through all these ways listed. We do farmers markets, we got a little wholesale, we've got CSAs, sometimes we provide restaurants. They're all good. There's our winter market stand right there. Really simple, but we can sell 100 dozen in a day pretty easy off that table, which is a decent little bit of change. I see I got a question here. How many layers do you have? 600. There we go. I got a little out of order. Sorry about that. So winter feeding kind of relates. So for your laying hens, it sounds like I go a little bit differently from what Alex does. It sounds like he increases the protein while I decrease the protein. That's just something that somebody clued me into a few years ago that I tried out and it seemed to work pretty good because it brought my feed costs down more than anything. Corn is way cheaper than soybeans. So if I can feed the birds higher carbohydrates, you get the same number of calories, thus the birds get the same amount of energy. And since I'm trying to drive down the egg production a little bit and save those eggs for the marketing season, it works out pretty good since I'm not trying to drive up egg production. So 15% protein, that'll save you a few bucks per ton. It adds up. Otherwise, maintain all of their nutritional levels for, keeping them in a steady lay cycle. You don't want them to dump much below 50% lay in the winter. Anything much below that, and maybe they're having health problems or they're not getting enough water or enough feed. There, and you see at the bottom, withholding feed and water combined with low light levels can trigger a molt cycle. You'll know you'll get in a molt cycle. They will lose some feathers. Some birds will go very bald. They'll look very raggedy. But most of them will look really fine. You're not going to have a whole barn full of bald birds in the winter. That wouldn't be healthy for them. Evolution wouldn't encourage that either. But they'll look a little raggedy. They're replacing their feathers. It's a good time to feed them plenty and not encourage them to lay eggs. That way they can get up some more feed reserves so that they can lay plenty of eggs during the season when you have more customers. That's the way I do it anyway. Oh, and that's a picture of our situation there. We have a barn. We actually gave up on the whole mobile thing. I found that birds really don't like moving around very much. At least chickens that lay eggs don't, because I found that if I stopped moving them and let them just stay in one spot, they laid me more eggs and they had better survivability. Okay. Watering, another challenge that's been mentioned. This is the waterer that I use as much as possible. I love it because it's cheap. I can order like 100 of these red things here. That's just a chicken nipple. You get them off eBay, super cheap, like 20, 30 cents a piece. So they're easily replaceable, easily repaired, easily installed, and I can just have a ton of them in backup if there's any kind of failure. And they don't tend to drip so much as the bell waterers that I've tried, and they're basically automated. And then you can see I load them onto a PVC pipe. In the winter, you can try that bucket on the bottom. So what I've done with the bucket is I'll have 4 or 5 of those staged around the barn on hooks and just fill it with water. And then the next day I'll swap those out and bring in some fresh ones because they freeze up. That is the weak point of these nipples is that they freeze. You know, they're small. It's a really small amount of water sticking off, so they'll freeze up. You know, but you use them most of the year, and it works pretty good. Then when things start getting really cold here in Harvard, we'll see 20 below for a good week out of the winter, last 3 winters anyway. So you wanna have some backup. This is what we use for backup. The pedestal one, the pan is nice, and then the one on the bottom that's smaller, I use that for our chicks. It's labor intensive because you got to go out. I change these out twice a day usually, but that's good because you can go out and make sure your birds are doing okay, nothing's wrong, make sure the electrical's all still working. You're walking around your birds, making sure they're not laying eggs in a funny spot or getting out, make sure there's no predator problems. So it's good to spend some time with your birds every day. And there's no electrical requirements, so the bills stay cheaper, which is kind of what I'm all about. Plus, there's no fire hazard. We have an ancient 100-year-old barn. It's highly flammable, so I like to shy away from electrical stuff as much as possible, reduce my risk that way. Okay, and I'll go back to the scheduling the flock, starting the chicks in the fall. This is actually the most challenging part of my operation is the chicks, because we start them in November, and you may have noticed it starts getting cold in November. But we really need the birds to be that age. You know, it's just the schedule, how it works out. So we need to find good ways to run them through the winter. So we start them in November, and they're little babies. Let's see, housing, brooder boxes, supplemental heat and protection, you want to ensure good ventilation, not drafty. That's the most important thing. With baby chicks, they're just little pieces of popcorn covered in hair. They can't do anything for themselves. They have barely any thermal regulation. Keeping it 95 degrees in a small environment is pretty challenging when it's 20 degrees and windy outside. So if you've got a garage or a shop or a pole barn, or a big trailer, put them in there, and then put one of these brooder boxes over them. There's a brooder box. There's a picture of it on top, and there's a picture of the inside on the bottom. It's super simple wiring, two lights on the inside. You can see I put a little window on top there so you can peek your head in without lifting the whole thing up and freaking them out. 2 250-watt red bulbs. Made out of plywood. I usually have some scrap around. I didn't spend much money on really any of this operation. This is a nice system too because it can grow with the birds until the point where they don't really need it anymore. So what I do is I keep a stash of bricks around and just lift the thing up so that the birds can always leave if they need to. So there's good ventilation. There's good air passage. I can throw bedding under there. Pine shavings, not cedar. You don't want to use cedar. That'll kill them. Pine shavings from your Tractor Supply or Fleet Farm or wherever. And you always want the outside edge of the box there to be at about shoulder height. So they have to duck, but they don't have to crawl or tunnel. So as they grow, you'll add a brick, lift it up a little bit until it's shoulder height to about a full-grown bird, and then you just leave it on until the end of winter. And then they don't need it anymore. As far as supplemental lighting goes for my grown birds, I mean supplemental heat, not lighting. For supplemental heat, I don't use any. My birds are just sitting in a barn right now, and they are fine. They are super good. The only thing is I just got to make sure they got water and feed and light, and then they're fine. And shut the door. But it's the chicks that you really want to watch for. So take good care of them, and then they'll grow up, and then they're pretty much low maintenance after that. Water, and the big one in the winter, really, that I found after making sure the water and the brooder situation is taken care of, the most vexing challenge is predators. Because around here, we've got a ton of woods around us in all directions. I've got a neighbor to the north who doesn't allow hunting or trapping. We've got a nature preserve out here. So we've got predators. So, weasels. That was one that came up last winter. We had lost a dozen birds before I don't even know what I did. I just chased it off and it didn't come back. But I'll kind of give you here's what to look for. Because what you'll do if you got birds is you'll go out and you'll find, oh, I've got dead birds or I've got missing birds, and you're trying to figure out what's out there, what am I trying to mitigate? Because you're not probably going to stumble across the predator. They usually come at night when you're not around. They're afraid of you. They're not afraid of chickens. So weasels, what you're looking for is stockpiling. That means they'll kill several birds and pile them all in a spot or stash them somewhere for later. They go for the neck, they bite, and they break necks. They don't eat meat. They don't eat meat. They just suck blood. So that's something to watch for too. They like to tunnel. They make a very neat, small tunnel. So you look for that. And they can fit in any hole that will allow your thumb to fit through. So your average barn has got plenty of those. Mitigation, hardware cloth, and exclusion are the two things you're looking for. Because electric fence isn't going to do it. If you got a weasel, good luck. They can't tunnel through wood. They can't tunnel through metal. They can't tunnel through concrete. So, that's a good place to put your birds, especially if you start seeing what looks like maybe a weasel problem. Skunks, that's another problem. If you go out there and you got some birds, got their heads torn off, it's messy, stinks, might be a skunk. Look for skunk tracks and look for big floppy burrows that just, look like just a mess. Because that's what they do. They're just messy and clumsy. If you ever watch a skunk, they are not a graceful animal. Mitigation's pretty easy with a skunk. You got hardware cloth, live traps. If you got some dogs around, they'll usually chase off a skunk. Be ready to give them a bath. Electric fence will work too, but they can crawl. So they can crawl under that. So watch out for that. Coyotes, that's a tough one. You can look for those traps. You can hear them howling and yipping. Coyotes will carry off a bird. So you might not know that they're missing until you look around and you think, gee, I used to get a lot more eggs and I used to run a lot more feed through these guys. Oh, I'm missing a lot of birds. That can sneak up on you. Also, they'll leave a feather pile. They'll kill a bird, rip it apart, and there'll be a big pile of feathers. Mitigation, actually not too hard. Exclusion, hardware cloth for your coop, electric fence for around the coop, live traps and snap traps. Also, they're afraid of dogs. And also out our way, a lot of people go varminting. They'll get a night scope on their rifle and they'll take care of it that way. It's a fun pastime that a lot of my neighbors like to take part in. Possums. Let's see. Yeah, they're good climbers. They leave a really weird, 5 or 6 fingered track that's very, very noticeable, and they drag their tails. They got a big, long rat tail. So look for those kind of tracks. Good climbers, so they'll go up into trees. I've had them pull birds out of trees and off of fence tops. Messy. Mitigation, also pretty easy. Just keep them out. Hardware cloth, live traps, dogs again. And hawks and owls, another tough one. This is another one where you might think, gee, I used to have more birds, because they'll carry them off. Also, beheading, evisceration, and you might find a carcass just laid out on the ground. Not much you can do on this front. They are federally protected birds, so exclusion is about all you've got. I've seen people go as far as putting netting out over their barnyard, but mostly you just want to watch out for that. Some people find that roosters work pretty good too, or a dog will chase them off. I keep mentioning hardware cloth. Here's a picture of that. Up in the upper right, it's the grid pattern. Hardware cloth is different from chicken wire. A lot of people confuse them. So chicken wire is for keeping chickens in, and hardware cloth keeps predators out. Any predator can chew their way or crawl their way through chicken wire, but I have yet to meet the critter that will gnaw its way through hardware cloth, except maybe a bear. So if you people out west, watch out for that. And there's a live trap that I like to use. They're super available at your Tractor Supply or Farm and Fleet. That's a picture of a woodchuck down there. Watch out for those too, because they can undermine the foundation of your barn or your house. So get rid of them. Yeah, that's about it. So thanks. If you got any questions, go ahead and type them. Or, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Nick and Alex. This is Larissa again. Actually, before we start our Q&A, which I know there have been some questions coming in, I have one last poll for our audience members. If you would please answer. Let me pull it up for us. Okay. So, after watching the presentations, how do you feel about your ability to tackle the challenges you face overwintering your birds? I feel more equipped to raise poultry during the winter. I feel about the same, or I feel less equipped. And again, we won't know. This is all done anonymously, so we won't know your answers. Let's take a minute or two here, allow the votes to roll in. It looks like the majority of you all feel a little bit more equipped, and maybe even more so after we get through some of your questions. So thank you. I'm going to go back up and kind of address some of the ones that came in earlier during Alex's presentation. So, well, first of all, people want to know if they can or how to order some of those chicken sweaters, but I don't know. I don't know, Nick, if those are available or not. But Alex, during your presentation, the question was, how many pounds of feed will that feeder, the feeder that you showed in one of your slides, hold? And I don't have it up on the screen, but I imagine it was your main feeder.
Yeah, those each hold, they say 300 pounds, so we have 600 pounds in there at a time. Actually, if you guys want to look at it, it actually has the model number underneath. It's like a R something 300 from Cole. I just was looking at it the other day, and they actually have an 800-pound feeder. I guess we're filling those twice a week. We could probably get away with refilling them every 5 days, but I think that answers it.
Yeah, the bigger size. And what was the brand? There's a question about what was the brand recommended for feeders and nest boxes. I know you spelled it out, but
yeah, it's Cole brand. I believe I'm saying it right. Who knows? KUHL. If you just write Cole, Poultry Division in, their website will pop up. Again, I would always buy directly from them. It's 10 times cheaper. You'll find their stuff everywhere online.
Great. We have a question about, have either of you used solar lighting? Nick or Alex, if you have anything to comment on that. Solar lighting.
We got windows in our barn.
I mean, in terms of no, I mean we're on. They're not LEDs, but they're not. They're just fluorescent, so they're using hardly any energy, and then we're getting all that passive solar light from daylight.
And it sounds about the same for you, yeah, Nick.
Yeah.
We have a question about if either of you are certified organic and about the feed that you use, GMO versus non-GMO. I actually forget what your certification status is.
We grow certified organic vegetables, but our feed is not organic. Finding an organic supplier that will ship to where we're located, we're kind of off the beaten path, has been pretty difficult. So it's hard to find a cost-effective way to get feed out here. I do want to say something about non-GMO feed since it came up. Is the thing about non-GMO feed is that if you're ordering non-GMO feed from somebody, it's a near guarantee, at least in Illinois, that they're using atrazine to produce that corn. And atrazine is an extremely persistent chemical, far worse than Roundup, in my opinion. So it's really not an improvement to go non-GMO unless you really want to make a specific statement about the companies that produce genetically modified organisms, or you really feel that genetically modified organisms are in some way bad. But this farm that we moved to and started producing organic vegetables on, it was very difficult the first year because there was still a lot of persistent atrazine at a lot of different points in the field. It kept our crops from growing. It affected our yields. It killed a lot of our plants the first couple years that we've been growing here. So buying non-GMO feed, I don't feel is actually a step in the right direction. Organic is great, and otherwise, I'd just go with what they got at the feed store, because that's what I do. It's a lot cheaper. It's a lot easier. That's my bit about that, though.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we switched over to a certified organic no soy feed here, but in the past we were on kind of like an all natural feed with added yeast cultures. The most natural we could find was GMO. Our new flock, we're unsure if we're going to certify it. We are a certified organic farm, and now feeding certified organic feed with no soy in it, but I'm kind of unsure if we're going to certify the chickens themselves.
Yeah, thanks for elaborating on that, you two. Our next question is, how many square feet per bird do you usually allocate for the winter? And how many linear inches of roost space? Alex, do you want to take that one first?
Yes, for linear roost space, I think we always went with 8 inches per bird. And then square feet per bird for the winter, it really depends on outdoor access. So I think the rule of thumb that we've always looked at is at least for inside 2 square feet for indoor housing. But we could push that. I mean, they really, really huddle together in the winter to stay warm. So, you could pack them in a really tight space as long as they're giving them outdoor access.
Yeah, I agree on that point too. We've got 100 square feet on each half of our barn, give or take. I want to say it's that. I haven't measured it in a while. But with 300 birds on either side of the barn, there is more space than they even want. They spread out during the day when it's nice and warm, but we don't have any problems with pecking or fighting. We don't debeak our birds. We don't despur them. They're totally fine with that amount of space, as long as you get them some outside access. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So during the winter, the question is, do you refrigerate your eggs after washing? Nick, do you want to take that one first?
Oh, yeah, you got to do that. If you're going to sell them legally, you need to refrigerate them, keep them under 45 degrees during travel. And most of the markets where they have a local health inspector come, they'll want to see 41 degrees internal temperature on those eggs or lower. So we try to keep them around 38 to 35 degrees if we can do it.
And Alex,
yeah. We actually, it's probably in the winter time. You're actually talking about heat your eggs more so than refrigeration. So we actually have a CoolBot system as a refrigeration unit, and we just put a little heater in there, a little milk house heater in there, and we have it set to kind of hold the temperature around 35, so they're not really competing with each other. But we do, I guess, refrigerate them, but also heat them at 35. And we wash them as fast as possible so that we can put them in there without having them kind of covered in poop.
Great. Are there any other questions that you all are wondering about? We have another minute or two. And we have a comment from Shannon who says you can put an incandescent light bulb in a refrigerator in the winter. Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to actually, good. I think we about all the time we have for today. So I'm going to thank everyone for joining us. I'm going to let you know that a recording of this webinar will be available really soon. We have all of our webinars archived on our website, and I will also email it to you all, and a copy of the slides will be available too. If you would be so kind, there will be a survey that immediately appears after this webinar. So if you could just take that short survey, give us a little bit more feedback, and you can also sign up to receive Fund a Farmer email updates about future webinars, scholarships, and our grant opportunities if you're not already on our list. We do have several more webinars coming up later in February and March, including one about starting and operating a meat CSA program for your farm. And we have another one about tips for managing fertility, disease, and pest control when rotating animals and vegetables. So a sincere thank you to our presenters. Is there anything else, Alex or Nick, that you'd like to say before we close?
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. And thank you both for your excellent presentations. And I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of your evening. Have a good night.